Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I'm sharing with you 30 things, sewing things, that I would buy again if I needed to. A little while ago, I did a video called 50 sewing things that I would not buy again. And it was a huge hit with you guys. So I figured that you would probably like this as well. Before we get into it, excuse the background, I'm in the middle of sorting my home out. I have done another life update video on my other channel, so check that out. It will be linked in the comments down below. So the first thing that I would buy again would be a rivet press. That is only if I was making bags and things like that, or lots of jeans where I needed to press rivet. In the event of making pretty dresses and tops, it's not something that I would need to use, but I do enjoy bag making from time to time. So a rivet press would be really good, especially if you have trouble with RSI. So you can buy those handheld rivet presses. No, I wouldn't buy one of those. I'd buy a hand press where you can go like that. It's very, very simple and easy to use. The next thing I would buy is an 18x2 ruler. Over the years, I've bought lots and lots of rulers, and there's only a few that I've gone back to time and time again, and this is one of them. 18x2 refers to inches. So you've seen them, they're the long, skinny, see-through ones. I've been through 3 or 4 of them and I need to buy another one, which I will be buying. I like them because they come in really handy for seam allowances. If I have to draw in my seam allowances, say for example, I am altering a pattern and I need to take the seam allowance away, then this is brilliant for that. Another ruler I would buy is a 1x6 inch ruler. So I've shown this in previous videos. I think I showed it in my sewing tools video, where it's just a little acrylic ruler. It's see-through again, and it's great for seam allowances. It's another ruler that I've gone to time and time again. So before we move away from rulers completely, a small curved ruler is something that I would buy again. I have enough curved rulers to last me a lifetime, but if I needed to, I would purchase a small curved ruler again. In fact, I would buy a big one and a small one, but in particular, I would buy a small one because when you are redrafting your armhole, you have to sometimes get in a tight little curve here, and it's going to be really helpful if you've got a small curve ruler to draft that seamlessly. The next thing I would purchase again would be a magnetic dish. So I've talked about these before lots and lots because I absolutely love them. I have 2 currently, but I've had more than that in the past. I think they are fantastic, especially if you've got flooring that is carpeted. It's going to be a lot easier than getting on the floor and picking up your pins one by one. It is going to save your knees and it's going to save your time. So the next thing that I really recommend is a walk-in foot. Now this is particularly useful if you sew jersey or stretch fabrics. But to be honest, when I had a walk-in foot before, I would just use it on everything because it really gives an even stitch because you have a feed dog at the top and at the bottom, so it feeds through really evenly. Now I lost mine a few years ago and I don't know where it went. So I do need to buy some more again, another one again. So the next thing to share with you is not technically a sewing tool, but it does work as one, and that is painter's tape, you know, frog tape. This is particularly helpful if you've got slippery fabrics. So we all know how difficult slippery fabrics can be to use. But if you take your painter's tape and tape your fabric down to the table, it's not going to shift. It's going to be much easier to cut it, especially if you're using a rotary blade. So the next sewing thing that I would buy again in a heartbeat is linen fabric. So I'm wearing my linen top today that you guys all love, and I cannot get enough of linen right now. I love that it is natural. It feels really cool in the summer, it feels warm in the winter. It just feels nice to wear because it's got natural fibres. None of this plasticky, polyestery fabric that we're sweating in. No, I really believe whatever your style of clothing that you love to wear, linen, you cannot go wrong with it. The next thing to share with you is my Deiss pattern weights. Now, you're not going to be able to find these anywhere. I've got hair on my nose and it's driving me mad. Now, you're not going to be able to find my Deiss pattern weights anywhere. I bought them at a seaside resort many, many years ago. I think they're supposed to be doorstops, and I've tried buying them again since and I can't get hold of them, so I doubt you'll be able to get hold of them. But pattern weights in general, if you find some that work really well for you, stick with them. Those two, I only have the 2 pattern weights. I also have some washers, but I never go to the washers. I only ever go to those pattern weights. They're very heavy, so they work really well to hold my fabric down. I think they look pretty on video as well. I just love them. The next thing that I would buy again, and in fact I will be buying again, is my roll of paper. If you're a regular, you would have seen this roll of paper for quite a few videos in the past because I'm always talking about it. But I bought it about 6 or 7 years ago. It had 300 meters of dressmaking paper on it. So it was 300 meters by 90 centimeters wide. And I've still got it 6 years later. I've probably got another 100 meters left on there. And when that runs out, I will buy it again. Now, whenever I've mentioned it before, people have always asked where I got it from. I bought it from a place called Moorplan in the UK, and I think I paid about 60 or 70 pounds for it. It was money well spent. I will leave a link to it down below. Normally when I film one of these videos, I stand up over there and do it over there, over there. Well, number one, everything's a mess in here. But number two, I'm getting over COVID at the moment, so we are sitting down and we're taking it easy. I'm over the worst of it. There's still a little bit there. If you're liking this video so far, do hit that subscribe button. Leave me a comment down below because those things really help the algorithm. Let's get on to the next one. The next thing to share with you that I would buy again, and I will when they run out, I will, and that is my Crayola pens. So you've also seen these in the past. They are great. They're marketed at children. They're washable ink pens. You know, when children, they have a knack of drawing on walls, you want to be able to wipe them off, and this is what these are for. But they also work really, really well on fabric. Now, someone had asked me if they work, if I draw on my fabric and then I iron my fabric, does that not bed it in, or does it still wash out? I have tested it and it does still wash out. But I say that with a caveat because I haven't tried every fabric out there. So if you are going to use them, make sure you do a test on a scrap piece of fabric before you go drawing in your darts. So the next thing I would buy again if I needed to, and I'm obviously going to need to, and that is Smith's needles. So when I was first sewing, I would buy any old cheap needles. I used to buy them from Poundland. And to be honest, I didn't have any problem with the cheap needles. I know a lot of people believe that you should have quality needles in your sewing machine, and I would certainly agree with that if you've got a high-end sewing machine. But if you've just bought a cheap sewing machine and you just don't have the budget, then buy the cheap needles. But for me, at this stage in my sewing, I've been sewing for over 10 years, I want quality products, because I want a quality end product. I haven't tried every quality needle out there. I'm sure there's other brands that are just as good, if not better. But for me, Smith's are good. They do the job really well, and also they're colour coded so you can tell which needle belongs to which. So I've talked at length in the past about the fact that I do not just discard a needle once I've done a project. Some people do that. I find it very, very wasteful. So it's good for me to know if I need to change my needle. Say I'm going from a woven to a jersey and I need to change the needle out, then it's really good for me to know what that previous needle was and I can make a note of it. So the next thing is quite controversial because a lot of people will say in the comments, and I'm sure you're going to be one of those people who will say it's unnecessary, but to buy 4 cones of the same colour thread for my serger. Now this might be to do with my autism, to do with OCD, something like that. But I really, really like having the 4 cones that are the same colour when I'm using the serger. Years ago, I went through a period of whenever I made a new garment, if I needed serger thread in a new colour, then I would buy those 4 colours then, because that would last forever. I wouldn't have to buy that colour again, and next time I might do another colour and I'd buy another colour. So I've got like 10-15 colours of thread now. So the next thing I would buy if I needed to is a mini iron. I recently did a video talking about the tools that you need when you start to sew, and one of those was an iron, a big iron, a steam iron, and I stand by that. However, if you're looking to buy extras, then a little mini iron can work really well. I wouldn't have it as my only iron just because it wouldn't do everything I need it to do, or it would, but it would take forever. If you have a big garment, if you're plus size like me and you need to iron the whole thing, a little mini iron is going to take forever to do that. But where a mini iron is really good is getting into those little crevices, into those little seams. If you're like me and you struggle to lift heavy things, then a big iron is not necessarily something you want to get out for every seam. So perhaps having your little iron, your mini iron on the side ready to go with a little mini ironing board, that could work really well for you. So the next thing I would purchase again is ribbon organza. So this is something that I purchased purely by accident many, many years ago. I was running my own sewing shop and I felt that this would be something good to have in my home, not in my home, in my shop. So I bought a load of it off eBay, more than I could ever sell. So it's stuck around for years and years. And all it is, it's a little piece of ribbon in organza and the edges are finished on the serger by the looks of it. It's see-through, you hardly see it on the inside, and you can trim away any that you don't need after you've stabilised it. So the next thing is a metal threader. So I showed this in my sewing tools video, but I've basically got a little metal threader that came with my sewing machine, and I absolutely love it because where I've got shaky hands, threading the needle can be really tiresome for me sometimes. But if I put that metal threader through the needle hole and then drag my thread through that, I'd do it in a split second. So the next thing I would purchase again is basting thread. So this is something I purchased by accident really. I was in a sewing shop, I was just looking at the things they have, because back in the day I would just look for stuff to buy rather than buying what I needed. And I came across that, thought I don't have any of that, we'll get some of that. So the next thing is Aurifil thread. It doesn't have to be Aurifil, but it has to be high quality thread. Similar to the needles, when I was first sewing, I would use any old thread. I would have the Coats threads. I'm just thinking if I can go and get them, but they're packed away at the moment. It was fine, it worked, but it was very linty, and I don't imagine that it was very good for my sewing machine over the years, but I didn't have any problems. As I'm now in a position where I'm paying more for my fabrics, I'm buying linens, which is expensive, I'm using expensive needles, I may as well use a more expensive thread. I received a pack of Aurifil threads that I won in a giveaway a few years ago, and I've used them on lots of projects, and they are really good, very strong. So the next thing is safety pins. Safety pins are more useful than you think. There's lots of reasons why you might need a safety pin, and usually it means turning something into something else or threading something through, maybe threading elastic through. We can have all these different one-use gadgets for sewing, but actually a safety pin, it just does everything that you would need it to do. For years and years, I only had one safety pin and I kept losing it. So more recently, I purchased a pack of safety pins, tiny ones, from Merchant and Mills, so that I don't run out and that I'm not left wondering, how am I going to turn this elastic through, or how am I going to turn this loop through? How very apt that I'm standing up for this next one, because it is my standing desk. That was a complete accident that I was going to stand up right now. I didn't plan this out. I got this standing desk a few years ago, about 2 years ago, as part of a brand deal. So it was given to me for free in exchange for mentioning it. But that was a couple of years ago. I'm not sponsored by them now. I can tell you that I absolutely love this standing desk. It's got a little control panel here. It can go down or it can go up. That comes in really, really handy if you have any kind of limitations. So the next thing is cloth-based interfacing. So when I first started sewing, I bought a reel, like a roll, I should say, of interfacing, and it was cheap. I think I paid like £50 for the whole roll. I don't know how much it had on there, maybe 20 meters, but it was that papery interfacing, the stuff that you use in bag making. And it worked, but it didn't at the same time. It stabilised the collars and what have you and the yokes, but it was really stiff. The benefit of fabric interfacing is, well, it says what it does on the tin. It's fabric interfaces, so it's fabric with glue on the back of it. So what happens is when you insert it into your garment sewing, it still maintains the movement that it needs to maintain, and it looks like a more professional garment. I'm very nasally today. I must still have a bit of COVID. The next thing I would buy, again, if I needed to, are dressmaking shears. So not just some cheap dressmaking shears, some expensive professional dressmaking shears. Now I have a big pair, which you've seen before. I want these and I haven't looked back. Now the one thing that goes against them is that they're very heavy. I guess you could shop around to find some lighter ones, but they're very heavy, and that means they anchor when you're cutting, so you're less likely to make mistakes. What I like about them is they have a really long blade, so there's less snips that you need to make. But I've got to sit down because I'm feeling a bit nauseous. So we've only got a few more to go now. So the next thing I would buy again is snips. So I bought a pair of gold plated ones from Merchant and Mills a couple of years ago. They only cost me £8. I absolutely love them. I've had loads and loads of snips in the past, cheap ones, and the blades didn't last very long. These have lasted a few years and they're still going strong. So I cannot recommend them enough. So the next thing I would buy again is printed A0 sheets from any company. I tend to buy mine from the Fold line. I get a really good service from them, but if you're not in the UK, you might want to use a service closer to you. A few months ago, probably 6 months ago or so, when I got back into sewing basically, my printer had died and I had no way of printing out patterns, so I started purchasing A0, and it takes out a whole job in between. So like when I had my printer, I'd print them off and I would have to tape them all together, and that was a big ball ache basically. So I don't have to do that now. I get my A0s, I open them up and I trace them off in the size that I need. The next things I would buy again are my bias makers. So I bought these on a whim many years ago, but they've been so useful, especially ever since I started making my own bias binding. Now, if you buy your bias binding, this won't apply to you, but if you want to make your own, you're either going to spend hours and hours and hours ironing one side, then the other, then folding it in half. Or you can put your bias maker in and it just all irons in one go and it's much, much quicker. The next thing I would buy, again, because it's completely and utterly necessary, is seam rippers. If you sew, you need a seam ripper, end of. And seam rippers don't last forever. You can buy some really high-end one, but I personally don't see a need to buy a high-end metal one when the cheaper ones last exactly the same length of time. The next thing I would purchase, again, is Wonder Clips. So I have got a whole load of them. I don't use them all the time, but I find them particularly helpful with bag making. Now I know certain people, Chelsea from the patterns, what are they called? Friday Pattern Company. In her videos, she always uses clips for her dressmaking. And I don't do that because I think the fabric's often too flimsy for those clips and pins work better. However, when I'm bag making or making even a garment that is really thick, it's got lots of layers, then I find those clips really, really helpful. So the next thing I would purchase, again, is a rotary cutter. Now, you're either team rotary cutter or you're team scissors. People tend to like one or the other. Personally, for me, I like using both at different times. So, for example, when I'm cutting jersey fabrics or slinky fabrics, then it's always going to be a rotary cutter for me because that's going to be so much easier. I can spray it with starch spray, I can tape it down, and then I can cut it with my rotary cutter, and it's just a much easier process for me than using scissors, especially with my shaky hands. The next thing I would purchase would be a mat to go with my rotary blade. You don't want to be cutting with a rotary blade on your table because you're going to mark it and damage it. Self-healing mat is one that you can buy and you can use it time and time again. Some people just leave them on their tabletop and work on top of the mat. I don't do that, but I do get mine out when I need to. I've got a pink one. I've also got a green one just over there, which is going to the charity shop because I only need one and I've got two at the moment. I like my pink one better. They're called self-healing mats. They're not self-healing. They don't repair themselves, but they do work for a long, long time. Now I've got one more, and if I have included everyone I've spoken about, this will be an extra one. If not, it'll be number 30. But that is sewing needles, hand sewing needles with big eyes. If you're someone who has shaky hands and you have ever tried to thread a sewing needle with a tiny eye, you have my sympathy because you'll be there for hours and hours. So whenever I buy a pack of needles, I always make sure they've got some eyes that are quite big because I find that much, much easier to sew. So leave me a comment down below and let me know which was your favourite things and what would you never be without. Hopefully you don't need to buy anything right now. And if you're thinking of it, check out this video over here where I'm talking about 50 things that you do not need to buy again for sewing ever in your life.